Hello, my name is Caleb Guile, and this is my presentation reviewing a banned book, written and presented by yours truly. The book is Always Running by Luis J. Rodriguez. As he says, to write is to reclaim your life. An empowering quote, especially considering his story. So let me tell you what that is. His story isn't your typical coming of age story. His story is real, it's raw, and it is deeply personal, just as the Broncos are to me. Rodriguez takes us into his world, the world that involves gangs, poverty, racism, and survival. And somehow, still through all of that, manages to find hope. He followed the sign. So what's the deal with Always Running? Why exactly has it been banned so much? Well, let's first start with what the story's about. The story is Rodriguez's memoir about growing up in East Los Angeles in the 1960s and 1970s, a time of gang wars, systemic injustice, and cultural identity crises. From a young age, Luis gets pulled into the gang life. He's surrounded by violence, cops who see him as a threat, and a school system that's ready to push him down instead of lift him up. Luis takes us through the chaos of his teenage years with brutal honesty. He joins a gang called the Lomas at just 12 years old. Not because he's inherently violent, but because it's survival. On the streets of East LA, being in a gang means protection, family, and identity. In a world that constantly tries to strip those things away, it's necessary. It's simply what has to be done in order to survive in that environment. We see him running from the cops. We see him skipping school. We see him watching his friends die in a never-ending cycle of poverty and retaliation. The way he writes really makes you feel like you're there, running with him, ducking behind walls, feeling the adrenaline, but more importantly, the emptiness that follows. That while yes, there is excitement in this life, one thing that most media doesn't show you about this life is what comes after the fact. And that is one of the big things that Rodriguez talked about, and it's one of the reasons why his story is so powerful. It's one of the things that he was able to use to leverage to escape this lifestyle. And at home, his life wasn't any easier. His father struggles to provide for his family after immigrating from Mexico, and Luis feels caught between two cultures. Too Mexican for the Americans and too American for the Mexicans. The cultural tug of war shapes a lot of his anger and confusion. School becomes just another battlefield for him, where teachers underestimate him and the system labels him as trouble long before he has a chance to prove otherwise. Each chapter shows how society pushes young people like Luis towards the edge and how easy it is to fall. But the book isn't just about violence. It's about transformation, because Luis doesn't stay trapped. He finds a way through his education, through his art, through his activism, and eventually becomes a writer and a community leader, using his story to escape the cycle that he once lived in. So now let's talk about what exactly made this book transborder. It's not just geography, and it's not my computer turning off. It's the in-between. He's Mexican-American, or more specifically, Chicano, constantly navigating between the two worlds, Mexico and the United States, Spanish and English, tradition and assimilation. The borders in the story aren't just physical, but they're emotional, cultural, and social. Think about it. The characters in Always Running are constantly crossing lines. The border between childhood and adulthood, between belonging and isolation, between being labeled a criminal and reclaiming your humanity, even the structure of the book, the way Rodriguez mixes Spanish and English, which made for an interesting read, but granted I'm not a native Spanish speaker, made it just take a little bit more time, reflects the border crossing identity. He doesn't translate everything for the reader, and that's intentional. It's his way of saying, this story doesn't need to fit into your world. It already exists in one of its own. The reason why that is so impactful is because it establishes Chicano culture as a culture in and of itself. a culture that's not just a mix between Mexican and American culture, but rather the child of the two becoming its own identity. One of the reasons why he's so impactful. So now, the big question, how does Rodriguez approach the study of transborder society and culture? He doesn't do it from a classroom or from a textbook, but rather he does it from a street. He studies it by living it. His writings in ethnography through experience, Rodriguez shows how systemic inequality, police brutality, and racism shape the lives of young Chicanos. Not in theory, but in the scars on his body and the trauma in his community. He also shows resilience through Chicano art, through protests, through the Chicano movement. He connects personal pain to collective struggle. The book becomes a voice for people who've been told their stories don't matter, or worse, shouldn't be told at all. Speaking of which, that leads us to the question of censorship. Always Running is one of the most banned books in America. Why? Because it's honest. It talks about gangs, drugs, and violence. But banning it does not erase those identities, nor does it erase the past that occurred, nor does it erase the issues that are in the present right now. It just hides them. When we ban books like this, we silence voices that challenge the system, that take an effort to make a change. We make it harder for students, especially Latino and Chicano students, to see themselves in literature. And honestly, that's the real danger. Because if young people can't see their struggles reflected anywhere, they start to believe that their stories don't matter. Rodriguez himself has said that his book gets banned because it works. It makes kids think. It makes them feel seen. And it makes adults sometimes uncomfortable. But isn't that what literature is supposed to do? Revolutionary literature specifically. Here's what's at stake. If we erase stories like Always Running, we're not just banning a book, we're erasing history. We're pretending that the pain of communities of color doesn't exist. We're saying your story isn't appropriate, but Luis J. Rodriguez proves that these stories are not only appropriate, they're essential. To conclude, Always Running isn't just about gangs or violence. It's about redemption. It's about crossing borders, not just between countries, but between despair and hope, between silence and storytelling. It's one of the main turning points that he used to turn his pain into purpose and to create a voice that could lift others. If you haven't read this, do. Not because it's comfortable, not because it's true, but because it's powerful. And in a world where truth, not because it's true, it definitely is true, but because it's powerful. Where truth is often silenced, this makes this book powerful, a more necessary thing than ever in the modern day. Thank you.